Howdy, folks. Welcome back to another special episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Deshotel, and I'm here with my co-host, David Leffler. Hey, David.
Hey Joe, what's going on?
Good, good. Well, we have a very special guest today, our own City Council member, Greg Casar. How are you doing, Greg?
I'm doing good. Thanks, y'all, for having me.
Good, man. Yeah, so great to have you. So you are currently in the middle of an exploratory effort for potentially running for Congress in Texas 35. Is that correct?
That's right. It is the district that runs basically from Pflugerville all the way down through East Austin, through Hayes County, Comal County, down into San Antonio, just right up to the Alamo. And it is a district that in the past was represented by Congressman Doggett, but now because of these horrible maps as they've been drawn, it changes up kind of where all of our districts are and who might run. And so Congressman Doggett has actually announced that he's running in a different district, opening this district up that includes so many of the communities that I've been organizing alongside here for a long time.
Well, yeah, we appreciate it. And we know you did a sort of an interview last week with us and tell us a little bit about what's going through your mind right now that you decided to enter this potential race.
I love local government and the work I've gotten to do helping constituents. But what got me really interested in thinking about the federal government was, actually when I was doing my city council job, which involved trudging through the snow and trying to bring blankets from my house and from some neighbors' houses to the school up the street during the winter storm where we were sheltering people from all across the neighborhood who had lost power. And it was when I was on that walk in the snow that I got a text about Governor Abbott being on Fox News, making things up about windmills and blaming the Green New Deal for the winter storm. And that was, I think, shortly after we had seen the news about Ted Cruz, going on vacation in the middle of a disaster. And for me, even though this local government work is so critical for protecting people's lives, man, the Republican leaders in the state have so abandoned us that we have to find a way to go over their heads. And really the best way to take care of people in Texas, if we continue to have people like Governor Abbott spending their time, beating up on people for political points, is for us to get federal action and the opportunity to organize people in our community to have a real voice at the federal level, I think is just so clearly important in a place like Texas. And it became really clear to me during that storm.
Right. Thank you for that answer, Councilman. I remember during the freeze, you were one of the most kind of forward-facing leaders in Austin, out getting water to folks in your community, trying to organize people to be able to access food. And obviously that's been part of your legacy in Austin. You have been one of the biggest leaders when it comes to fighting for things like paid sick leave, when it comes to addressing affordability in Austin. And, I think this has obviously made you a very beloved figure around Austin, but you've also experienced firsthand some of the frustrations and limitations that can come with that when you have the state government led by Greg Abbott, who has come in and actively thwarted several of those measures that you've actively pushed for. So how much did things like that factor or are factoring in rather into your consideration to run for Congress? And how would you like to deliver a lot of those same efforts at the federal level?
Right. I mean, like you mentioned, in the middle of the pandemic is when the Republican Supreme Court banned paid sick time laws across the state. I mean, nothing could be more clear about the stakes here. When people were dying because they were going to work sick and getting other people sick, their response was not to give people sick time. It was to try to take it away. And the fact of the matter is we have the ability in Congress to pass a law that gives every American paid sick time, just like people in every other advanced economy in the world have, but not just paid sick time, but also paid parental leave and affordable childcare and a healthcare system that isn't based on profits, but is based on taking care of people. And that's what's possible in Congress. And that's, I think, where we're going to have to be able to get action to protect ourselves from the actions of the Republican legislature here. And so it really is a motivating factor. It's so important for us to have champions at the local level, taking care of us, bringing those blankets, delivering that food, for us to have great state legislators trying to block things at the Capitol. But if we want to see substantial progress on affordability or racial justice or healthcare or basic rights to abortion care or LGBTQ rights, so much of that in Texas, we need to be able to have our local governments being supported by the federal government, because we can only expect that Governor Abbott's going to keep on trying to undo the good work here locally.
You know, it's funny you say that, the undo the great work we're doing here locally, because it seems like, UT likes to say what starts here changes the world. And we know in Austin, everything we try to do, many of these efforts were led by your office. We see the state come right back in the next session and try to undo that at the state level. And although, we're sort of a statewide podcast, but we focus on Austin a lot because of that. So I know we're Austin centric, but it's simply because what happens here ends up being extrapolated across the whole state. And so I'm kind of wondering too, like, what can we do to take what you're doing? I mean, we're looking at Prop A right now, which is another example of that. Republicans are looking at that from all over the country, not just here locally, as an archetype. What can we do to make sure that not only do we defeat local efforts or statewide efforts that are trying to undo our good work, but how do you plan to sort of translate that into the national stage so that other people can learn from some of the things that you've been doing here in Austin and the progress we've made, and how we stop Republicans from undoing it?
The role of a organizer in Congress isn't just to take good votes, but it's to how do we make sure we empower communities to be able to make change, so that it doesn't just rely on this vote passing or that law passing or failing, but how do we build a whole movement that changes the state? And that's what we've been thinking a lot about at the local level, and y'all have been covering that at the Signal. And it's also how we can think about it at the federal level. So, when we passed a historic affordable housing election, the biggest of any community in the South here just a few years ago, Beto O'Rourke was on the ballot. There was a lot of energy. And instead of going small, we went big to try to bring affordable housing to this community. And when we did that, it inspired cities across the state. And now in San Antonio, they've passed a ballot measure to start allowing them to do affordable housing elections. And they're going to do one soon. Or when we decided to stop doing so many personal marijuana arrests and pass a policy to stop having so many discretionary arrests that lead to working class people and working families and people of color getting overly arrested. And we wrote that policy here in Austin. Pretty soon we're starting to get calls in Hays County and in San Marcos, other parts of Texas 35, that wanted to do the same thing. And when we do it like that, the legislature has a lot of trouble keeping up. No matter how much they want to use Austin as a punching bag, they just can't undo everything we do, right? If we do 20 good things, then maybe they only have time to try to go undo a couple of them. Or with Prop A, maybe they have time to try to go undo one or two big things, but they just can't keep up if we're actually building a movement. And so part of my hope is to, if I run for this seat, not just be one member of Congress that, manages my own votes and my own Twitter account, and that's it. Instead, how can elected officials sort of be part of a broader movement to build up organizations and leaders at every university and in every neighborhood and across racial groups, so that everybody is chipping in on their work? And I feel like that's what really changes things, because, at the legislature, they're slow. They meet every couple of years. And I don't think that they could keep up if we're doing it at, doing progressive work at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when you're talking about, for folks who may not be aware, you are a former labor organizer with the Workers' Defense Project. You've done a lot of immigration reform advocacy. So being connected with these communities, as you're talking about, has been foundational to your entire kind of political and life perspective, right? When you talk about some of these communities that would, you'd potentially be representing, have you been having conversations with kind of community leaders there and organizations there? And if so, what are some of the things you're hearing about how they would like to be represented at the federal level?
Yeah, up and down Texas 35, there are so many communities, right? You're talking about Pflugerville and Manor, East Austin, Del Valley, parts of, tons of Hayes County. You've got Kyle and San Marcos down into San Antonio and Eastern Bexar County. And each of those communities has their own issues that really need to be addressed. But overwhelmingly, up and down 35, people have felt that, they're places that too often get left behind because they're considered places with less power or less money. But in my view, in my experience as an Austin council member representing many of these same communities and fighting for many of these same neighborhoods, I think of it as communities that are often just underestimated. When I started out as a labor organizer organizing low-wage construction workers, when we wanted to take on one of the biggest hotel companies in the country who were breaking the law and underpaying their workers, there were a lot of folks that said, what's the point of that? What are the chances that you can actually win that kind of a fight? Or, representing lots of people in mobile home parks that were getting kicked out by out-of-state investors when we were bringing on volunteer lawyers and marching on management trailers and calling their national office. There are a lot of reporters and people in power saying, well, that sounds good, but is it really going to change anything? But in each of those cases, actually working folks who didn't give up won. We actually got millions of dollars in fines against that hotel company, though we had the former mayor at the time, Lee Leffingwell, and the big construction company all against us. The workers won that fight. And actually, with the mobile home park, after 5 years of work, they actually got together enough of their own money, philanthropic money, and city money to buy their mobile home park back from these corporate landlords. And so I think that it really is communities that are underestimated, but if they just get, cooperation and some support from their elected officials, and if their voices can be better heard at the national scale or even at the local scale, there's just incredible things that can happen. And that's really what we need to do is again, take on fights where people think we might not be able to win, but we have to, and raise that up when we're talking about getting to a $15 an hour or a $20 an hour minimum wage across the country, or about taking real climate action so that we can save the planet. When we're talking about these big issues we face in Texas, again, I think it's going to come down to the people who are underestimated getting real support from progressives that are willing to put it on the line to not give up and to try to win even against the big interests.
Yeah, I mean, and that covers a lot of ground, and it makes me wonder, have you thought much about what your first legislation might be, or do you have a one or two things where day one I get there, I'm going to file this bill?
I have not written down bill number one, but I'm open to suggestions. People can send me notes because and it's not for lack of ideas, it's because there's so many.
Sure.
I mean, there's just so much work that it is we have to do. But what I will say is one of the most important things for any of this to work is to protect and restore just basic democracy. Mm-hmm. Because right now the rules are so rigged against working people in the first place. So of course, right, climate action is critical because there aren't jobs on a dead planet. And of course, making sure people can afford to live here and afford their medical care are the basic things. But for us to be able to get that stuff, we also have to recognize that we have to undo the kind of gerrymandering that takes away one person, one vote. We have to give immigrant community members who've lived here often for decades and that work here and send their kids to school in our communities, the right to vote, because we have millions of immigrants who live here and don't have that right. The fact that DC, a place that is overwhelmingly working people and families of color, should also have representation in Congress. And some of those things, they may not be the immediate thing that somebody talks about at the door, because somebody might want to talk about their health care or their housing or the VA and those, protecting Social Security. That stuff is definitely like my priorities and things I care about the most. But if we ever want to be able to get that stuff done and keep doing that work, we have to unrig a system that's been rigged by right-wing forces and status quo forces for so long. And that's, things like Citizens United and the filibuster and voting rights, all these things that skew representation away from the needs of everyday people and towards the status quo. And we've got to unrig the game so that working people have a shot, so that we can better protect Social Security, so that we can better reduce the for-profit part of our healthcare industry. For us to ever be able to get to all of that, I think we have to also just protect our democracy and get back to one person, one vote.
Right. No, I could not agree more. And I think for, a lot of people who are going to be listening to this, I'm sure some people's reaction who may not have heard you before are thinking like, all right, clearly this guy is not just focused on local politics in Austin. This is, you've had your eye on just statewide and federal issues. It's something that you talk about a lot because you recognize that so many of these things are connected. The decisions made at the federal and state level are what affects communities like Austin's. And so in that way, I guess be curious to hear. So obviously you've launched your exploratory committee, but have not yet officially declared your candidacy. To whatever extent you can share, what are you kind of looking for before making that run official?
So we've launched the exploratory committee at rungregrun.org. And within a few hours of posting that, had over 1,000 people sign up to be potential volunteers and potential supporters. And so what I'm doing is I'm visiting communities up and down Texas 35, having conversations, making sure that it's the right thing. And if it's something you want to be a part of, you can go to the website and sign up, and you'll be amongst the very first to hear. I'm really encouraged by so much support, right? I mean, there are a lot of campaigns that never get to 1,000 volunteers. And the fact that we had over 1,000 people sign up on the first day where I wasn't even running yet, I think was really encouraging and something I don't take for granted. And so, I'm likely to run if we continue to see that kind of support, because I take really seriously the responsibility of us being a city council member and being able to show people real, immediate local results. But I also know that some of these challenges are so much bigger than just what the city can handle. And so I'll be making the final decision here in the coming days, now that the maps just got signed into law just yesterday. And, I hope and will support the lawsuits against those maps, because they're wrong and they're terrible. But if this is the way that the maps will be for now, then, I'm likely to make a decision in the coming days after I've, done some more visits through each of these cities and gotten a sense that it's what people want me to do.
Well, excellent. I mean, and I think in the city of Austin, you may actually be termed out as far as I'm aware. I think there's a provision that would allow you to get signatures to run again. But I mean, I having, organized alongside you before you were on city council and just kind of having you recall some of these things that you've done, it seems like you're well positioned to make that leap. And I think you could do a lot of good work, and they certainly need you up there. So we really appreciate you taking some time today to talk a little bit about it, and good luck. And we hope to hear from you some news very soon. And I think
I appreciate it. Y'all
Mm-hmm.
will get the note from me whenever I decide, but it's just been great hanging out with y'all. And if folks are interested, feel free to reach out.
And again, and Greg, real quick, one question.
Yeah.
So I think the kind of two main questions on people's mind right now is probably one, is he going to declare? And two, is he going to continue growing his hair out? And so for anyone, we can't see on video right now that during the pandemic, Greg has grown out a fine head of hair. So the question is, will you keep it going?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think people might read into it. If I chop it off, which could very well may or may not be scheduled, getting it chopped off this week, people might read into it. That means he's doing it. That means he's not. Yeah. And so I think we'll just leave that up to people's comments on Instagram and see what they think.
Yeah, I just assumed it was like Hercules, like your source of power, but so we can't see it go just yet, I don't think. But all right, Greg. Well, I know you've got to go right now, so thanks again, and we'll look out for some news.
That sounds good. Y'all take care.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye. So I'm looking at his list. I had not looked at his supporter list. It's pretty extensive. He's got a lot of elected officials and well-known candidates and council colleagues and community organizers that you would recognize yourself. A lot of these
Yeah.
names.
He
So
even got the endorsement of Julie Oliver. So
I mean, yeah. Is Doggett on here too? Because if he could bring them together, that's pretty impressive. But yeah, no, he's got a good list here, so good for
I
him.
know it looks like the ACL lineup the way he has it organized.
Yeah, definitely. I think, he's definitely a little further along than I realized. But certainly having that many folks sign up to jump on board and potentially be a part of it is great. And I do think that the way the maps are drawn, from the way I look at it here, I do believe it's probably an Austin centric map in terms of they're more Travis County residents who are probably more aware of him than San
Right.
Antonio and Bexar County. And, there have been a couple names from Bexar County that have come up who might potentially run in this district. One would be Trey Martinez Fisher, who is his current state representative, who left office to go run for Senate. But then when he lost that race, he challenged the incumbent Democrat and won his seat back where he sits now. And apparently he has requested that he be put into this district. So it sounds very much like he's considering a run, which would obviously be a San Antonio based run. But having looked at the turnout numbers for Bexar County and versus Travis, and it seems Bexar County turnout is much lower in this area than the Travis County turnout. So just for practical purposes and reasons, I think that there's an advantage, it seems like, to running this seat out of Travis County than it would be in Bexar. And then, of course, Doggett, who occupied this seat or currently occupies 35, which still goes into San Antonio. We also know that he fought that fight himself based out of Austin. So I think it, as he's looking and you asked him, what he's considering, I think this has got to be a big part of it.
Right. And if you're looking at the list, beyond just from a political perspective, there's a lot of people who are very culturally prominent around here too. And you see Mike Siegel, you see all the, I recognize most of the names on here. It feels like this is kind of a technical question because you know this a lot better than I do. I'm assuming this isn't going to the podcast, right?
Well, we are still recording, so far, yeah.
I'm just curious, when you see so many names on here in this exploratory committee that's listed on his website, there's got to be over 100 names here. For people who are listening, I'd be curious, just from your experience in campaigns, why, what are the functions of the exploratory committee with this many people on it? What does that look like from the inside?
Well, usually it means that you definitely want to do it, but it costs so much money. A congressional campaign these days, a minimum $750,000. So he's going to have to raise $1 million potentially in a very competitive race if that's what it turns out to be. And so you want to see a lot of diversity within the community. And I notice a lot of people will put people on their list that don't even live in the district. And I'm sure there are people on here who don't live in that district. But at least their constituency or their reach needs to be in that community. And a lot of these folks, I can tell, do that because they're run different various organizations. But I think that the idea is that if somebody else thinks they want to get in this race, they will come to this website and then they will see all these names and they'll be like, well, I can't talk to these people. And so, that poses a huge challenge. And I think it's a deterrent for someone who might want to jump in the race. But
it's as much a staking a claim than anything else.
Yeah, it's putting your name out there. That's such a huge part of it. People call and ask me to support them for office or whatever, and a lot of times, looking back over time, it's usually the first person who has called me that I like and that I know and would support, and then maybe somebody else I know gets in the race, but you've already committed.
Yeah.
So getting out early is hugely important. It's not always the determining factor, but but he's definitely got a very diverse list here starting so far.
Right. And I mean, if you look back, right, and what was it during Beto's 2018 run? I remember a couple weeks before voting started, Beto had this huge rally on along the lake in Austin. There were thousands of people there, and Greg was the person who personally introduced him. So I would imagine, I think that's exemplifying. Just shows how much kind of connections he has beyond Austin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was curious about on this list, is how many folks are actually in that Bexar County part, because I think that's going to be the sort of the tough go is it's a trek down there. It's an hour 15 minutes. Folks who can't see the map, there's like a portion of Travis County, but then it literally is like a string that goes all the way down 35 all the way to San Antonio. And so it's just making that trip up and down 35 to talk to the other half of the district, and that's just a function of the gerrymandering that has taken place. And so whoever wins the district will have to represent a different community. It's Central Texas based, but I mean, San Antonio itself is like the 8th or 9th largest city in America, and Austin is right behind it. And so these are two very large and diverse communities. And so I think that'll be a challenge in one sense, but in the other sense of how polarized politics are in DC, it's almost like you're either a D or an R anyway, unless you're a Manchin or a Sinema, right?
And then all bets are off.
Yeah. Then who knows? But obviously he would be a very strong D. So I think whoever jumps in the race is definitely going to be looking at this list and thinking twice about it. So it'll be interesting to see what other names surface in the next week or so.
Right. Yeah. And again, for anyone who's listening, again, that website is rungregrun.org. And if you're interested in reading up on the Texas Signals write-up with the council member last week, there's a great piece by Fernando Ramirez on our website that goes into his motivations for potentially running, as well as some of the main issues that are driving this consideration on his end.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, well, I guess we will continue to follow this, and it sounds like we'll be some of the first to hear if he does decide to jump in the race. It looks pretty good for him. So, keep your eyes posted to texassignal.com and follow us on social. We'll be putting out little clips of this as well, and yeah, you'll hear it if you're not signed up at Run Greg Run. You'll probably hear it from us soon after it's announced. So keep it here, and we'll stay in touch.
Cool. Thanks, Joe, and thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, David.